Okay, so in this video we're going to be unboxing the Zumi. I've got the little instruction manual out here, and I've watched a few unboxing videos as well. There's one or two on YouTube already. I'll try and make this a bit different if I can. And yeah, let's just dive into it. So the very first thing that we need to do, if I go back to our box, now we need to fix the two motors, the left and the right motor, to the bottom chassis of the car. So this on the second level is the chassis. Let's just take, if we take the battery out to put it here, that means we can get rid of this entire second level. Then we've got the car and the wheels from the top level just by here. And the first thing I want to do is to connect the two motors to the chassis. Now, one really important thing to note with the chassis is what side is the front and what side is the back. The front is where the line follower IR sensors are going to go from the board. So if you'll remember that there's some sensors sticking out the side, the top of the board like this, or actually the bottom because the way it's going to be set. They're going to eventually slot into these four holes. So these four holes actually mark the front of the chassis. Okay, so if this is the front, we want the two motors that we've got to be connected to these two holes with the cables running towards the back of the chassis. Okay, there's only one way of achieving that with each motor, so you don't need to worry too much about which one is left and which one is right. Okay, so I'm going to connect those like this. Now, one thing you want to be really careful of is that you've put the little arms on the motors on the inside of the chassis and not the outside. So we want these to be fixed like this, with the motor arms along the inside, and not like this, so that the motor's sticking out so much. Okay, so make sure the motor is off and it's in. So place it in so it's loose, and then slide it so that it fits nice and snugly along the side of the chassis like so. You're then going to need 4 motor screws. Now they're going to be inside the fasteners box. So let's open this up for the first time. Okay, and I can see that there are 8 motor screws there already, and I'm going to need the little screwdriver as well. So let's open that up. Okay, so as you unbox these things and as you get more and more pieces, it's really important to try and manage your workspace. So notice anything that's empty, I'm putting as far to the right as I possibly can, and I'm trying to keep that in some sort of order. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close the box and put it back in this space where it came from. I won't do that with the fasteners because I've still got a bag of fasteners that we're making our way through. So we've got our little screwdriver now, and if I take out 4 of these screws, and use these screws to fix the motors to the inside of the Zumi chassis. So I'm going to carefully place one of these screws into the thread, and I'm just going to take that screwdriver and use that to fasten it. Now, one thing I've noticed already with the screwdriver, this is the first time that I've unboxed this, it rotates about the end, like this, and that makes it really easy to turn the screwdriver and then to use the end to rotate back so that you're able to continuously rotate without letting the screwdriver go. That's a really nice touch, and they didn't have to do that. The screwdriver that came with this could have quite easily just been a solid molded piece of plastic with a small screwdriver poking at the end. So I'm really impressed that's what you get. Okay, and again, I'm just making sure that cable is pointing towards the back, and we've got the motor on the inside of the chassis. Let's put one screw in here. And another screw in here. Okay, so that looks good. We've got our two motors now. You can see that the actual kind of axle of the motor is towards the back end of the Zumi. Again, this is the front of the chassis, and that's step one done.
Long sockets.
Now the next thing you're going to need, again in the fasteners bag, we're going to want 3 long sockets. Okay. So 3 long socket standoffs, which you can see here, really nicely labelled by the makers of Zumi. I really like how easy it is to follow the instruction guide. And I'm very confident that most of my students so far wouldn't have had too much trouble with this, provided you keep reminding them to slow down and keep reviewing the manual. But the manual itself really is written in a way that's easy to follow. They've really minimized the amount of writing and done things as visually as possible. And again, everything that they're asking you to use perfectly matches the stickers on the bags that contain those components. So I know that now that I need 3 socket standoffs and 3 thick silver bolts, and here are our thick silver bolts. So let's take 3 of those out of the bag. Alright, 3 of those. And I want to fix those now to the chassis that I've been building, and the position of those 3 things, let's see if I can figure that out. They do indicate it quite nicely actually on the diagram. So let's use the screwdriver. I'll show you the manual. So you can see they've circled a sort of aerial picture of the chassis. So I can quite easily see now it's the this hole here and this hole here, we sort of make a triangle, and then it's the second hole in according to this diagram. So not this top one here, not this top one here, but this second hole here. So let's make sure that works okay. Let's put it together. So I'm going to start off by threading through the screw, and then what I'm actually going to do is rotate the socket standoff just to get us fairly tight. I'll do the same for the other 2. Okay, and that's the 3 socket standoffs fixed. The next step is to attach the Zumi battery. Now, I've read a bunch of times, Zumi really do make this clear. Let me just find the battery, I took it out and put it here. Keep your workspace organised. Zumi really do keep reminding you that if you're working in a classroom environment, not to use the Velcro attachments that come with the Zumi. So they do give you these two little Velcro patches, and what they will do is attach the battery. They'll firmly fix the battery to the two motors. The problem with that is if you want to change your battery, you're going to need to take these Velcro fasteners off, right? Obviously you can just tear off the battery, so you can just remove it from the Zumi, okay, fine. But then if you're swapping to a new battery, you're going to need to pick off the Velcro fastener and put it on the new battery. And that can be a bit of a hassle. Also, if either of the motors stop working, then it's going to be a hassle then too. So for the classroom environment, RoboLink do encourage you to not use the Velcro fasteners, and that's what we're not going to do, because this will be used ultimately by some of my students. So I'm going to now put the Zumi battery loosely with the Zumi logo on top, just like it is in the diagram, and facing the back of the car, so it'll just fit quite snugly between those standoffs that we just screwed in. Okay, now you want to make sure that the wires come out towards the back, the same as with the two motor wires. And then the next thing that you need to do is to add standoffs to the actual board itself. Now the standoffs go on the top of the board, so not the side of the board that has these really long IR sensors coming down. And if I take the short plug standoffs, which is what we need this time, we've got one long plug standoff left, and I'm just going to put that back in the bag so that we don't mix it up with the other components. So we're going to take two short plug standoffs, and we also need two thin silver bolts. So we'll take two thin silver bolts out of the bag, and let's attach this to the board itself. Now again, Zumi have made it quite clear where they want you to attach the plug standoffs. If I share the guide that you'll be using, you can see that it's the two holes on the edges either side of the IR sensors that are poking out there. So if I look at the IR sensors poking out and I figure out where that is, I can see that it must be these two edge holes here. So I'm going to carefully now, because this is the actual board we're using, thread that through to the top side of the board, and I'm going to screw in one of the plug standoffs. I'll then do exactly the same with the second silver bolt and the second plug standoff. Okay, what we want to do now is to actually attach the battery, the motors to our board. Now remember, the board, the front of our car is where the four holes are for the IR sensors, and the back is where these leads are coming out. So if I imagine this board is going to flip this way, then I want to attach them with the board facing, so the back of the board facing the back of the chassis. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in the motor that's on the right side of the car to the right motor slot here. Now you want to be really careful when you do this and make sure that you're plugging it in the right way. Do we have any clues on we don't have any clues on the board, but we do have clues when we look at and consider the actual white ports themselves. You can see that the two little female connectors are more towards one side than they are the other. And if I look at the board and I look at the port on the board, there are two metal male connectors that are closer to this inner side than they are the outer side. So I know that when I plug this motor in, I want those two female ports to match up with the male ports on this side. So that's connected nice and correctly. And then I do the same here. So our two female connectors are just on that side, and the metal ones again are closer to the middle. So let's have that pointing towards the middle. Okay, now the batteries came away, but I'm okay with that. I can put the battery closer. I'll just put the battery back in there now. Okay, perfect. Now we didn't need to connect to the battery, but what we are going to do is fold the wire nicely there, and then we're going to turn this over, and now we're about to start gently threading those IR sensors through and into the bottom of the chassis. Now we want to be really gentle here. We don't want to break any of the IR sensors, and we'll know when we're almost there because the standoff that third standoff that we connected right at the beginning is going to be flush with the board, and that's going to be the right time then for us to screw a thick silver bolt through and into that plug standoff. Now, one thing I'm noticing at this point is trying to deal with the kind of sandwich of boards and having a battery that isn't velcroed in place. The battery does keep swinging about. It does seem like I can quite easily put the battery in place when I need it to be in place. So what I'm going to do right now is to pull out the battery completely and just not deal with that. When I'm building this with students, if this works, I'll advise them to do the same. So forget about the battery stage, and we'll figure out the best time to put the battery in place later on. So I would skip that stage. Now, once you've folded the boards over, you can see how these standoffs line up to the holes on the board quite clearly. To keep these boards in place, you're going to want to get the two long plug standoffs ready. And if I were to do this again, I'd have these out the bag already. So get two long plug standoffs ready. Let's put those boards back in place again. Make sure though, again, those infrared LEDs are lined up nicely. You'll know if they're not, because you won't be connecting with the board too closely enough on that plug standoff towards the front. Now that has connected well, so I'm going to quickly now just put these two long plug standoffs. I'm going to connect those straight back into it. So that's one plug standoff, and I'm just going to connect that other one, and that holds the board firmly in place now, and I feel quite confident that these two things aren't going to separate. Again, I've removed the battery, so we'll pop that back in a little bit later. So now I've got my two short standoffs and my two larger standoffs on this side. Now that they're held in nicely, what we want to do is to attach that mounting bracket that was in the box. So now I've got the mounting bracket. I want that so that the sort of the larger what do I call that? The larger modules at the end in the corners are at the top, and I'm going to place that on top of my board, and you can see now how that lines up nicely with those two holes. I'm going to fix the mounting bracket then using one of the using a thick silver bolt. Okay, so I'm going to again go over to my little baggies. Let's get one of the thick silver bolts. Let's put it through the mounting bracket so that I've got it ready. Ooh, let's put it through the right way at least. And let's line that up with the the standoff. Once it's lined up, I can get the screwdriver and start threading that through there. Okay, so hands. I understand it for some reason, continue on. Favourite has to go away, doesn't it? Maybe use my right hand, it's away. Okay, and that's in nice and tight. So now we've got the mounting bracket attached. Now we're given a tip to make sure that this mounting bracket is completely flat against the board, which we can see it is. What we're ready to do now is to attach the Pi camera. Now, the Pi camera is probably one of the more expensive components that we're dealing with. Of course, the board is going to be fairly expensive, but the Pi camera will also. I don't actually know the price. I'm gonna find out though once this video is done. So very carefully now, what do I have in here? Let's just look at the side of the box. I've got the OLED screen, which is this thing. I've got the Pi camera, which must be in here, and I've got some jumper wire. All I need is the Pi camera, so I'll put the OLED and the jumper wire to one side, and I can see that this is completely unopened. So let's open the Pi camera. And let's very gently encourage it out of the bag. Now, interestingly, the ribbon cable is already attached to the Pi camera, so I don't need to do very much here. It's already latched in, which is good. But if yours isn't already, maybe I should unlatch it. Maybe I should unlatch it just so that you can see. Okay, so I've just taken off the ribbon cable, and the latch doesn't swing open like you might imagine. It doesn't clamp down onto the ribbon cable. Really, it's just a small sliding latch, and you can see how small, how little give it has. You just want to make sure that that's poking out. So make sure that's poking out, and then you want your ribbon cable, then the black side of your ribbon cable with the black end facing up. You just want to poke that in and then push it as far as you can, and then you're going to close that latch just by pushing it shut like so. And what that should do is hold that small ribbon cable in place. Okay. Another thing you're going to notice is there's a small sticker on the front of the camera lens, just keeping it nice and clean. I'm going to keep that on for now, because I'm kind of building the car and I'm worried that some oil from my hand is going to transfer to that lens if I'm not careful. So let's keep it covered. Okay, so with the ribbon cable on facing the top of the board, I'm just going to line that Pi camera up now. You can see now that there are two small holes here on the left and the right, which line up with, if I remove it, with the two holes on the mounting bracket. So for that I'm going to need two mounting bolts. So let's remove the camera temporarily. Let's grab two of the mounting bolts. Very small. These are very small, so do be careful. We're kind of in the mission critical part of the build right now. So let's put that camera gently. Okay. Let's place it as gently as we can. Again, I'm really glad I decided to keep that sticker in place now. I don't have a magnetic screwdriver, do I? That's a shame. So I like the rotationy bit at the end that makes it easy, but just a heads up, RoboLink, if you do want to improve the screwdriver, maybe a small magnetic tip. Or is that too much to ask for? I don't know. Okay, so what you'll see here is quite a lengthy, albeit sped up clip of me trying to fix on the Raspberry Pi camera. Those mounting screws are really small, and they're extremely difficult to use. It's very easy to drop them probably quite easy to lose them in the classroom. So what I'm about to say now is that it's probably better if we do this with older students. Okay, so that comment I made earlier about younger students having no problem with using this so far, I would not expect any student younger than, I think, grade 9, year 10, to do this perfectly. And with it being, you're using a Raspberry Pi camera, these are quite critical components. I probably would opt to either do this for younger students or to have older classes build the Zumi and then have younger students program it. So right now, I think probably ideally grade 10, year 11 would be the class that I would be building the Zumi with. The complete Zumis then could be used by younger classes, by younger age groups. Anyway, that's attached. The next thing that we need to do is to attach a heatsink to the Pi Zero. Now, I haven't seen a heatsink lying around, so I'm hoping it's in the Pi Zero box. Let's find out. Yeah. Okay, so we've got a heatsink here. I'll put it on top of that box. And we've got our lovely Raspberry Pi Zero. Okay, fantastic. So it looks as though the heatsink needs to be adhesively attached to this chip here. There doesn't seem to be a specific way to do it, or at least we're not told. Yes, we're not told that there's any particular way to attach the heatsink. However, I'm going to imitate the direction that was given in the booklet. So that's with these running along the length of the board. It doesn't seem to have a front or a back. I want this to be lined up as well as possible. Okay, so that's our heatsink. Now actually, if I was building this with a grade 10 class, like I said, or a year 11 class, this is a perfect opportunity to start talking about the thermal effects on thermal effects of circuit on current. So why do we need a heatsink in the first place? What is it about the shape of the heatsink that makes it good for its function? And also, what material is this made out of? Now, I don't actually know. I wonder if it's just dried thermal paste. It's certainly not made out of metal. It's some kind of, I think, polymer. So I'd be interested in finding out a bit more about this, and I think that could be an entire lesson in itself. Of course, you don't just want to build the Zumi, you want to understand the Zumi. That's the whole idea behind the maker-learner's ethos. Really what we're doing is learning. We just happen to be building things as we learn. So I would be interested actually in making and we are back at where I left off. So I was just talking about the thermal paste, and then the next thing we wanted to do was to actually connect this Raspberry Pi to the chassis and the main board. Now, the way that we do that, we flip this Raspberry... Oh, I've got the GoPro. We flip this Raspberry Pi over so that these pins are facing the same side of the board as the holes for these pins as well. What you'll notice is there's room for 5 pairs on the left and 5 pairs on the right, and that has to be the first 5 pairs on the Raspberry Pi and the last 5 pairs on the Raspberry Pi. So you don't want any of these going over. I'll show you exactly what I mean now, but just before I do that, I want to latch the Pi camera onto the Raspberry Pi board, and it's got exactly the same mechanism that we saw on the other side, actually connected to the Pi camera. What we're going to do is we're going to latch it in such a way that this ribbon cable doesn't twist. So I'm going to push that in. Okay. So I'm going to push that in, and once it's nice and snug, I'm going to close that latch. Okay, making sure that we've got a nice, strong connection. Okay, now if you really tug at this, it will come out. It's enough just to give it a tiny little pull, just to make sure that it is quite snug in there. Make sure that your SD card's in as well. That's going to store the data that your Raspberry Pi is going to use. Again, we've got that thermal paste on. And then I'm going to fold that ribbon cable back. I'm going to sort of make a nice S shape. And I'm going to attach this Raspberry Pi so that those 5 pins match up at the beginning and at the end, those 5 pairs. That should also mean that the threads on these 2 mounts go through these 2 holes in the Raspberry Pi board. So let's do that quickly. So line those up as best I can, and it should just push in nice and easily. Awesome. Okay, so I've pushed that in. That ribbon cable now is trapped underneath the Raspberry Pi board. I've got that latched in, and I've connected those 5 pins and 5 pins. Perfect. So the next thing I want to do now is to attach 2 short mounts to the top of that Raspberry Pi board to keep it in its place. I'm just glancing back over the instruction guide, making sure I'm not missing anything too important. But I think at this stage it is just a case of fixing this board to the rest of the Zumi. I'm not going to do that really tight because I don't want to risk warping or breaking this Raspberry Pi board. This is very much our Zumi's brain. Okay, so that fixes the Raspberry Pi board on. The next thing that I'm going to want to do is to attach the OLED screen. I'm going to do that by connecting the jumper wire to the OLED. Now the way that works is the pins will be at the top of the OLED, and if I'm looking at the back of the OLED, I want the green wire on the left hand side and the black wire on the right hand side. I'm then going to screw 2 mounting bolts, those really small, hard to use screws. I had a tough time the first time, and now I'm redoing it, so hopefully it's not too difficult. But you're going to screw those through the bottom of the OLED this time, and those 2 holes at the bottom are going to line up with the top 2 holes of the mounting bracket that we put on. So that mounting bracket has 4 holes for threads, the bottom 2 attached to the Pi camera, and then the top 2 attached to the bottom of the OLED, so that the OLED, let's put that into space, so the OLED is above the Raspberry Pi camera. Okay, so the best way I find to do this is to put the screws through the holes in the OLED first. Now, I wonder actually if smaller people will be better at this than older people. I wonder if my students would actually have better eyesight, better dexterity, and might be able to do this better than I can. I'm up for the challenge. I'm up to see if they can. Okay, so they are in. What I'm going to do now is line one of those up with the mounting bracket, and once that's lined up, I'm going to hold it in place, grab the screwdriver, and I'm going to start threading that through. That's just going to hold it in place enough. Now you want to be careful here and make sure that you don't screw these in particular. I mean, any of these screws shouldn't be screwed as tight as you can possibly do it. but in particular these two that are connecting the OLED screen, because if you do, you risk warping that screen, then that screen's going to crack. There's a very, very, very thin piece of glass at the front of this, just wafer thin, and that will break if there's any warpage at all. Let's turn that a bit because I know it's going to distract you that you can see the recording behind me there. Okay, the next thing we want to do is to connect the other end of the jumper wire to the 4 pins that are just to the right hand side of the OLED. The way that we want to connect those is so that the jumper wire closest to the OLED is the green jumper wire. So make sure it's the green wire that's facing front, the black that's facing back. And that's just going to slide onto these 4 pins here. Okay, so we'll push those on. Perfect. Okay, once that is done, we're about ready now for the shell to go on. Now, if the shell's going on, that means that the battery needs to be at least in place. It's not quite ready to be connected yet, but I'm going to slide the battery in where it should have gone earlier in the first step. And I'm going to make sure that the cable for the battery runs over here and kind of tucks up behind the back, just underneath the switch, so that when the shell's on, I'm able to access that lead and I'm able to plug in the battery. So opening up the back of our shell, just to give us the space that we need, we're going to move the entire setup now into the Zumi. We're going to make sure that the infrared sensors poke through the front of the Zumi and that we can see that Pi camera right in the front middle of the Zumi. The OLED screen is then going to be visible through the front windscreen of the Zumi, and that seems about perfect. You'll know if you've got it right because you're going to be able to see the threads for those mounting, I forget the names now, those mounting those plug standoffs. You're going to be able to see the threads for those right at the top. And what you need, so let's just close the boot of that Zumi. What you're going to need is for the 2 that are closest to the edge, facing the back of the Zumi, you're going to want the thick silver standoffs in place. And for the front of the Zumi, so for these 2 plugs, you're going to want the thin silver bolts in their place. Okay, so that's all 4 of the ones we need. Let's get that one in place. Okay. Okay, perfect. Just one quick check to make sure that everything's lined up. We can see that there's a gap in the shell here that allows us to access this infrared detector, this IR sensor. We can see that the sensors are visible at the front. We can see that the brake lights and the sensors at the back are visible. Make sure that the switch is set to off, which it is. I should soon be able to plug the battery in. In fact, that might be something that we can do right now. The only thing we haven't done, well, let's put the wheels on first. Now, with the wheels, you'll notice if you look carefully that one side of the wheel has a serrated inner thread. That is to connect with the serrations, the teeth on the outside of the motor. So press that serrated end onto the shaft coming out of the motor, and that should clip on quite nicely, quite easily. Do that on both sides, and then you're going to want one of the sharp motor screws for each side just to keep that wheel in place. Turn it a bit, but try not to turn it so much that the wheel turns. Let's put the second one on. And then again, oh, let's turn it a little bit and until the wheel turns. Okay, perfect. So that's the shell in place. What we're going to do now is open the trunk, and that should give us the space that we need to connect the battery. Now, if you look closely at the battery port, it does say red on one side, black on the other. Now that's for this red and black cable, okay? So make sure that you plug this in so that the red is on the left of the switch, looking at it from below. You'll see the little red text, and then black on the right. So I'm just going to press that in now. And then hopefully I won't have to pull that out again. That was actually really hard to pull out. I don't know how they expect you to. I can imagine actually having to pull so hard that those cables come out. Now, if the battery needs changing, that's going to be a horrible predicament to find yourself in. So do be careful trying to unplug that battery, and then close the trunk, and we are done. Now, I am super excited for the next videos because we're finally now in a position to start coding, to start trying out different activities and asking ourselves, where do these belong in secondary education? So what subject areas, what topics can we learn through making and writing code for the Zumi? So I'm really excited for the next series of videos. Yeah, I'll see you next time. Thanks for building the Zumi with me. Bye for now.